Hey guys, I'm Elise, and this cake not only tastes delicious, it's also remote control and it drives delicious. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you want to check out my pages, it's MyCupcakeAddiction, and we post stuff like this all the time. Well, we're okay, we're good. Oh, we're not good. It still goes. I think we're good. Today I'm going to show you guys how to make a remote control truck cake that actually drives. I know, it's going to be a lot of fun. I really shouldn't eat and drive. Apart from obviously your truck, you're also going to need some things to make your cake portion. I'll leave a link to this toy truck down below. I've also got some cake. I'm going to use pound cakes here, but you could also bake a regular sheet cake and cut to size. I'm going with the super easy version so that you guys can whip this up in as little time as possible. I've got some cardboard cake boards, some chocolate ganache, and I'll leave a link to my ganache recipe down below. I've got food coloring in yellow, red, and black, but you guys can choose your own colors here. A little silver luster to add a bit of shine, and some white fondant, because my truck's white. A word to the wise, don't let the kids play with this first. Make sure the truck stays clean and dry, and try not to crash it off the side of your kitchen bench. We're gonna have a little fun. The first thing I'm gonna do is I need to build up my space a little bit, because at the moment I've got all these different wonky angles, and I can work around these guys, but this one needs to come off. It's gotta go. I'm gonna use a serrated edge knife to just cut off anything that's kind of raised on my back deck, but these little guys here on the front deck, there's not a lot that I can do about that, so I'm gonna use some fondant and use it almost like an edible Play-Doh. And there's no exact size here, it really depends on the size of your truck, and it may take a little trial and error to get it even, but I'm gonna kind of roll it into a bit of a sausage and then squish it out into like a flat rectangle, so it builds up that truck bed so it's all one level. Take your cardboard cake board, and I'm gonna cut it to the same size as a regular pound cake. As I said, you guys can use your own cake recipe here. You could do a mud cake, you could do whatever you like, but I discovered that a regular pound cake that is just store-bought is the perfect size for my truck bed. So I feel like it's a bit of a match made in heaven and saves us a bit of time. Once you've cut your back piece, I've got a tiny indent in my front section, so I'm gonna cut a smaller piece of that cake board just to sit inside, and then I'm gonna trim another piece of cake board to size. So I essentially have the main part of my truck, which is that entire back truck bed, and then I've got that little cabin right behind the cab of the truck. I'm gonna use almost exactly 3 store-bought pound cakes here. So you wanna start with the length of the truck bed, and I just sort of sliced off the 2 ends so that my 2 pound cakes could fit together really nice and flat, and then cut a smaller piece of pound cake out of your remains to fit that little piece just behind the truck cab. He's kind of like his own mini cake. With the remains of your pound cake, I'm almost gonna jigsaw this together. So I'm gonna cut this like 2/3, 3/4 of a pound cake right down the middle to make 2 layers, and whatever I've got left in scraps, I'm gonna make almost like little chip-sized portions that kind of fit in as a jigsaw. You want those big, solid, stable bits of pound cake on the ends, and those little kind of jigsaw stick-together bits in the middle. Now we make our cakes. You can pull them off the truck on their little boards, and we're gonna make the cakes on their individual boards, and then we'll attach them all to the truck at the end. I'm gonna use ganache because ganache gives you a really nice firm setting when you wanna lay fondant over a cake, and it's basically a combination of cream and chocolate. I'll leave a link to my ganache video down below, so you guys can check it out if you've never made it before. I'm gonna start by putting a little ganache just straight down onto those little cake boards, and then lay my first layer of cake down. Literally anywhere that cake touches another cake, so those little side sections or the tops or all of my little pieces, I'm gonna put a nice little thin coating of ganache in between to stick everything together. As opposed to frosting, ganache actually sets really nice and firm, so it helps to hold the structure and the shape of your truck, as well as obviously being delicious. Once you've got all of your pieces in place, you can take a bit of time to ganache the outside edges. The smaller one, believe it or not, is actually harder, and I find it easiest just to pick it up and use an offset spatula just to kind of smear ganache all over the sides of it. You want to set that in the fridge. So as soon as you've got a really rough coat, chuck it in the fridge for 15 minutes and then you can come back and it won't be so hard to work with. Repeat that for your long section of the truck, again putting it in the fridge, and then you can bring out your short section again and apply a second coat. At this point, it pays to take a little bit of time to get that coating of ganache really nice and smooth. You can use a ruler to smooth it off or an offset spatula, but I like to make sure that I have the shape that I want before I lay the fondant over the top, because as much as you think you can get a great shape out of fondant, really it is the base and the foundation of the ganache shape that gives your finished cake its overall look. I'm gonna put those back off into the fridge and I'm gonna let them set for at least 30 minutes, maybe even an hour, until they're really nice and firm. At this point, I have a back trailer and like a front cabin area. I'm not a truck driver, I can try. It's not the place where the guy sleeps, because that's in there. Engine? The engine? I don't know, my future as a truck driver is looking dubious. I'll have to stick to cakes. So I've got the back of my truck and then I've got my little small piece. These guys are pretty smooth, but I'm gonna take a little bit more of pretty fluid ganache. So your ganache will set like firm and then you can microwave it for 10 seconds at a time to get it a little more spreadable. And I've actually taken mine just another about 15 seconds in the microwave, so it's a little runnier. If it starts to separate or get it all grainy, give it a really good stir and it will bring it back together. You want it to be smooth and shiny and glossy, but sometimes on the remelt, I don't know why, it can just separate a bit. So I'm gonna use this just to put a really nice final smooth coating, and by setting that cake in between, this allows me to have a really stable base to build from. My biggest concern here is to try and get my corners and my edges nice and sharp, because we don't want to have a rounded truck. That's just not correct. I may not be a truck driver, but I know they're pretty square. If any of you guys have ganached square cakes before, you'll know square cakes are the devil. And if you have a choice, go round whenever possible. Obviously we can't have a round truck, so I have to deal with it. Whenever you're doing squares, you want to try and build up the corners as much as possible, because it's always going to be your corners, the top of your corners particularly, that kind of lose height and end up sagging and making your whole cake look rounded. So I always try to add like a little bit more ganache just into that corner section so I can kind of cheat it and have almost too much there to work with rather than risk having too little. Once you've got your last super smooth coat of ganache on, you want to pop your 2 pieces of truck back in the fridge for about another 20 minutes so they're really nice and firm. When you're ready to take them out, sprinkle down a little bit of either cornstarch, or you could use icing sugar here or confectioner's sugar, and then you want to roll out your white fondant to like a nice big flat rectangle shape, big enough that it's going to cover the main large section of your truck. Something that looks a little bit like this, kind of like a big long rectangle pizza dough made out of sugar. Now we cover the back of our truck. So I'm gonna lift up my big sheet of fondant, move my truck into place, hope that I've measured roughly correctly. Start on this side, drop it down, and over she goes. Particularly important with square cakes is to secure the top and then your sides and edges first, because if your fondant's gonna tear anywhere here, it's gonna be your corners. I want to make sure that I get any air bubbles that I can out of that top section. If you happen to have one of these, this is a fondant smoother, they can be a great tool just to be able to apply a bit of pressure and just sort of flatten things down, smooth them off. If you don't have one of those, you can very gently, and I mean very gently, no pressure, just kind of use your rolling pin just to sort of roll over the top to get that fondant really nice and flat, and also to get any air bubbles out. These are like $3 though. I don't like you guys spending too much on your cake tools, but for $3, this is a really good investment. When you get to the corners, again, I'm gonna secure all the way down my corner, and then I'm just gonna sort of flatten out. You don't wanna get elephant skin here. So elephant skin is when this kind of thing here sort of sags over. When it starts to go creasy, the fondant can start to dry out. But I'm just gonna alleviate that by sort of pulling the fondant out and then patting it down so I don't get a real crease in there. I kind of like stretch it out so that everything falls into place. And then smooth. Now before I go and cut around the bottom of this, I'm just gonna push my fondant in just a little bit all the way around my cake. And this is gonna help it to secure, but it's also gonna stop it from pulling out and away from the cake after I cut it when I go to remove my excess. Just helps to seal it all up and kind of presses it into that cake board as well, so that you're not exposing any of your cardboard cake board underneath. And then we pizza cutter around the edges. So whenever I pizza cutter, I try not to come in on too much of an angle, and I go straight up and down as close to the edge of the board as possible. But don't come in on an angle like this, or you'll end up with like a divot under the cake. And don't go out like that, or you'll stab the top of the cake with your pizza cutter, which at this point would be heartbreaking. Remove, check for any little bits of chocolate and pull those out, because we want this to stay nice and white, and then we can re-roll it and do the same to cover our smaller piece. While ganaching the smaller piece might have actually been considerably harder, fondant covering it should be much, much easier. At this point, you can't put that back in the fridge anymore, or your fondant will get really sticky. So from here, it can just stay at room temperature. That's the end of what I call the boring bits. For me, baking it, carving it, stacking it, and covering it, not so fun, but necessary. Now we get to do the fun bits. We're going to assemble and we're going to decorate. I'm going to use a little bit of melted white candy melt, or any colored candy melt, but I'm sticking with white so I don't accidentally see it poking out anywhere. And this is going to essentially glue my cake boards onto my truck. In goes my first board, just to hold it in place, because we know people are going to drive this, and the last thing I want is some kind of a truck cake catastrophe. Imagine the insurance on that. All right, a nice generous blob of the white on this board, and I've already glued that board down, and then on goes my little section. You'll have a couple of seconds to move this guy around so it's nice and central, and then don't touch it till that candy melt sets. Down goes a little bit more of this candy melt. You notice I'm putting it in the middle, not too close to the edges, because I really don't want to see candy melt coming out the side of my truck. For this guy, I'm going to use an offset spatula, and I'm just going to come carefully under so that I can lift it up. There's very likely going to be an amount of chocolate ganache around the underside edges of your truck, so be very careful after you put it down not to touch it until you've washed your hands. I'd hate for you guys to get big brown smudges. Load's a little unstable, load's a little unstable, but I think we're okay. All right, before I touch that, I'm just gonna wash my hands, and then we're gonna press it into place. Now that I'm happy with the positioning, I'm just gonna press down using my smoother. And again, if you want to move around, I mean, these smoothers are great. Just sort of push it into place. It saves you pushing it with your fingers and getting little fingerprints and finger marks. If you must use your hands, use the whole palm. Now it's time to decorate, and you guys can get creative here. I'm going for kind of simple being best. So I'm going to cut strips of white fondant, and I'm using a ruler just to get a rough guide to how long I need them for my long strips. The long strips are going to be the most difficult. You can either use an edible silver paint here, or you can mix together some silver luster dust with either a clear alcohol like vodka, or if the cake's for kids, you can use a little lemon extract. Even though I am using a few drops of vodka here, I promise you that there's no chance of small drunk children running around your party after eating a piece of this cake. It's literally a couple of drops of vodka, and the alcohol portion evaporates, which is what allows your silver luster paint to dry a lot faster than if you just use something like a plain water. Paint them and let them dry for at least 30 minutes, because they'll be a lot easier to handle if they're completely dry and if that fondant started to set a little bit. Like I said, those long ones are going to be your toughest, so start with those. So just brush a little bit of water so that it just makes that sugary fondant surface sticky straight onto the truck. I'm going to rest my silver stripe onto the ruler, and then I'm going to basically flip the ruler up in place so that the silver stripe doesn't sag or bow in the middle and it stays nice and neat. You've got a couple of minutes here until that water underneath dries, so you can use the ruler to make sure that your edges are really nice and in line, and you can also shift it around a little bit if you need to. If you happen to get any of that pesky silver on the white parts of the cake, you can just use a little bit of regular water and a paintbrush to just kind of brush over it until it comes off, and then pat it dry with a piece of paper towel. I'm going to repeat that with all of my long strips and then small strips, so I'm basically creating a border around the fronts, the backs, and the sides of both pieces of my remote control truck cake. To make your number plates, take a bit of white fondant, measure it to size so it fits nicely on your truck, and then I'm going to paint it yellow. Take some black food coloring and just paint on whatever you want your number plate to read. I'm opting for caked for obvious reasons, but this might be a good place to put the birthday boy or girl's name, or the name of the person that's going to be receiving this awesome truck cake. Oh my God, you guys! Truck, cake, cake truck? Is there a mashup name there? Truck cake? crock. I don't know, suggest one. Remote cake troll. No, it's not working. There's no mashup here. This is our truck at this point. It looks amazing. And I've kind of left it as a bit of a blank canvas. So I'm gonna stick on my teeny tiny little number plates, caked, adorable. And if you wanna do some more detailing on the side, you can. You can hand paint it if you feel like you've got a steady hand, or, and I'll leave a little link to these, I just created these little templates. I've printed these out on edible image paper. If you don't have an edible printer, because I get that not everybody does other than me, you can actually send these to a lot of places online. And if you know in advance that you need them, send over that template, get them to print it, they'll post it to you, and you can put this edible image directly on the side of your truck. Sometimes these sheets of edible paper can be a little temperamental, so if you have any trouble with it not coming off the backing paper really easily, as a tip, put it in the freezer for like 30 minutes and then get a really sharp knife and just use it to make the first separation, kind of slide the knife underneath. I actually prefer to leave my edible images out on the table for at least a day before I want to use them, because as they kind of dry out a bit, they come off that backing paper much easier. I'm going to use a little bit of water to attach my number plates, and then a very small amount of water just on the back of my edible images that I'm just going to pat on with a damp paper towel so that I don't get any kind of watery spots. Stick on your side logos and your truck cake is ready to go. The moment of truth, you guys. I thought I should shoot an outro where I didn't run it just in case I run it off the edge of the bench, but then I was like, oh, don't be silly, let's just do it. So I'm going to reach underneath, turn my truck on, and I'm just gonna go for it. He's got a load. Whoa! Whoa! Oh my God, you guys, we made a remote control truck cake. This is the greatest thing I have ever made. I think I say that every cake, but this is actually the greatest thing I've ever made. My kids are gonna go absolutely crazy for this. I think I'm gonna have to leave it here and get them in. I think I need some opinions of real construction workers to see if I manage to get this cake true to form.
Whoa, it's cake. 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 Is it gonna be chocolate inside? Yeah.
This was so much fun to make, you guys. Thanks so much for watching.